Veterans in Transition is sponsored by HireVeteransFirst.com, Jelani Consulting, and Village Connector Community.
Welcome to Veterans in Transition, where we promote the veteran community. Each week, we travel around the region highlighting veteran-related news, issues, and events. In this episode, the recent decrease in the homeless veteran population shows that the majority of homeless veterans live in urban areas. The National Coalition for Homeless Veterans held their annual conference in Washington, D.C. African American veterans are overrepresented in the homeless veteran population. In this session, the panel explores promising practices in serving minority veterans.
I want to set the stage for how I conceived it and how it should be structured. One, in the write-up, the abstract I talked about, even though there's a reduction in homelessness overall, there seems to be still a disproportionate number of African Americans that are reflected in it. And it's interesting, over the last 20 years, the proportion of African Americans reflected in the homeless population has not changed. The overall number has changed. If you go to the official documents, down from 250,000 20 years ago and 40% African American, down to 39, 40,000 now, but it's still the same percentage, 40%. Right? And I'm not a math major or statistics. I did very poorly in that in college, but I'm still confused about how that works. Secondly, they're saying that the urban population is still being impacted by this homeless veterans phenomenon. Right? And my background is I am an urban planner by training. Right? And so we needed to look at that. So in identifying how I wanted to put this panel together, one, I thought it was important that we have somebody talk about what's going on in Los Angeles, which is the homeless veterans capital of the world. Two, to recognize somebody from the city of New York to talk about what is going on with homelessness in the city of New York. Three, to have someone talk to the issue of homeless women veterans, which I'm now told is the fastest growing segment of the homeless veterans population. And I probably would add that that is particularly true of women with children, because there's some issue about women with children going into homeless shelters. And as a former HUD employee, there's even issues of women with children, if one is a boy and the other is a girl, how their living arrangements. You cannot have a boy and a girl living in the same bedroom according to state and local regulations. All right, so there's still some issues to be addressed.
But my name is Jazz Booth. I am a 17-year Army veteran, and I'm currently a major in the Army Reserves. I run an organization called Final Salute, Inc., which provides safe and suitable housing to homeless women veterans and their children. And for those of you who don't know, women veterans are currently the fastest growing homeless population in America. I myself found myself homeless in 2005 due to a cancer diagnosis. Well, first I lost everything to Hurricane Katrina in August, and then I got the cancer diagnosis in September, so 2005 was just a phenomenal time for me. But it was through those experiences that I found out about the lack of resources for homeless women veterans with children. Now, luckily for me, I had an aunt's couch that I was able to sleep on and didn't have to hit the streets. But I was turned away from the Department of Veterans Affairs because at that time they didn't have any supportive housing services for women veterans with children. And until 2011, for those of you who don't know about the GAO report that came out, they didn't even track women veterans as a homeless population prior to that report coming out. And so we're still getting caught up on the knees of my sisters in arms, which unfortunately is hurting us once we get out of the military. And so I created my organization, Final Salute, Inc. in 2010 to give them a resource in their time of need. But obviously, it's more work than I can do alone. The reporting mechanisms still have a long way to go. So currently, the federal definition of homelessness does not include couch surfing as a definition of homelessness. However, that's the primarily of what women veterans do, sleep in their cars or couch surf, because they don't want to lose their children. Over 70% of the women who come to Final Salute are over 70% of the women that come to Final Salute are single mothers with children. And we know most of the federally funded programs either don't take in women, or they take in women of children with a certain age, or they take in only a certain amount of children, which leaves some of us, again, having to bounce from home to home, sleep in their cars, or even stay in domestic violence situations. And so the federal definition of homelessness when it comes to women veterans is a bit of a catch-22, because you have to physically be homeless. But how many of you have ever seen a woman panhandling with a child on the side of the road? I've never seen it. You've seen it? Yeah, I've never seen it. But however, if you are out there with a kid, someone's going to call the police or child protective services on you. And also, if you're a woman veteran who's on the street with a child, you're vulnerable to violence and rape and other types of things that are not safe. So although the federal definition of homeless is there for a reason to develop criteria, it's also a hindrance in women actually going to ask for help out of fear of losing their children. So some of the things that we have to look at. Women have children just like men have families. And so if you're going to accommodate for a man and his family, you should be able to accommodate for women and hers. But also in dealing with veterans, with women, they say they don't understand our population. Well, we know that we've deployed over 60,000 single mothers to Iraq and Afghanistan, and we're going to have 60,000 that come back. So we know what the numbers are, and I know that some of the organizations don't talk to each other as well as they should. Because if you look at unemployment as a huge reason for causality amongst veteran homelessness. So the Department of Labor reports that 495,000 veterans are unemployed. However, HUD reports that only 40,000 veterans are homeless. So you can't lead me to believe that 450,000 veterans without unemployment are maintaining their households. So those are type of disparity that we have to look at from causality, because if you don't have a job, then there's no way you can have a home. Then most of us do double up. But again, if you're doubling up, then you don't count. So for my organization, we were told that we would never receive federal funding because we do take women who couch surf. We aid in prevention. We don't want you to have to be on the streets. However, additionally, requiring them to be on the streets doesn't mean you can help them. Not every shelter is going to have a bed. Not every program is going to be able to help a veteran. So again, we need to look at some of the hierarchies and the old processes we've put in place that are counterproductive to trying to help veteran prevent homelessness or to get into housing. But again, women veterans my primarily focus, although I'm married to a veteran. My oldest son serves in the Air Force, so I care about my brothers and sisters equally. But we know historically women veterans have gotten the short end of the sticks when it comes to federal resources coming once they've left the military. So that's my 2 cents. There's a white paper on my site that I created that talks about some of the issues. And you all, this document that I also created, this graphic lets you know about some of the numbers and disparities in accounting. And I don't think the VA is doing anything on purpose. I just think, again, that they're just now scratching the surface on women veterans as a unique homeless population. But however, you have these grassroots organizations that are able to do things that the government can't, and that's why it's important that they're supported. But also understand that our frustration is you have this grant criteria that does not take us into account, which hurts some of the work that we're trying to do that the VA can't. If it's truly supposed to be a coalition, you can't have a partnership and let the money's going in and coming out both ways. You can't just say, yeah, we're a partner, and you don't support the organizations that are doing that. You can't. So that's what we need to work better on, making sure that those dollars are going where they're needed and finding ways around that federal definition that is outdated and too stringent currently.
As part of my portion of this presentation, I really just wanted to focus on the best practices and how I see it in serving minority veterans. Because like I said, for 19 years, I served as a executive director for U.S. Vets, and I had that keen opportunity to witness what needed to be done and the efforts that needed to get into doing it. So by the numbers, in the state of California, there are 1.6 million veterans. Of that number, black vets represent less than 10%. When you go down to the county level, on the county level, like I said, we did the point-in-time count last year. It was 2,700 veterans. Of that number, 40% of black vets access services or are still identified as being in shelters or unsheltered. One of the things that came out of that point in time count was the idea of trying to develop more programming or better programming. In Los Angeles, we have the United Way and we have Home for Good, which is an initiative that is funded primarily by the Conrad Hilton Foundation. This is the private sector getting involved, trying to ensure that they provide funding and the mechanisms to help deal with the issue that is prevalent in Los Angeles. As Mr. Armstead has pointed out, Los Angeles is considered the homeless capital amongst veterans. But I think it's the homeless capital just period, just because of the temperate climate. This morning, for instance, I saw a little trailer across the news screen that said homelessness in Los Angeles has increased by 23%, but amongst veterans, it has decreased. We was having conversations earlier, while I was at lunch, and one of the things that was kind of like highlighted is that even though, there's been a decrease in the number of veterans, being homeless, the idea is maybe the system, meaning the governmental agencies, have come to some implicit understanding. Let us target one subset of the homeless population first. Do a good job of that, and then we probably can replicate the strategies or the interventions to deploy in serving a general homeless population. I must say, as far as a concept, that might possibly be true. I don't want to say that I'm a conspiracy theorist up here, because the idea is that we tend to keep each other down, but it just seems to make sense, because over the last, 20 years that I've been involved, first as a beneficiary of services and then ultimately getting involved and serving, I gotta tell you, there's this new phenomenon they're talking about, HUD-VASH. In my book, it's not new, because it's just something that the system pulled off the shelf and dusted off and called it a new name. When I first came into this process, the reality was there was a substance abuse epidemic in the country, and the VA, as one of its process in helping veterans, is if they completed some level of counseling or service or treatment, one of the rewards or the incentives was that we'll give you a voucher so that you can live in the community at large. Here we are 20-something years later, and some of those veterans that was accessing those same systems 20-something years ago are the same vets that are accessing those systems now. In Los Angeles, and I gotta speak only to Los Angeles, they have developed a collaborative effort where homeless veterans, there's no wrong door. If a veteran is homeless in Los Angeles, it's because he chooses to be homeless. There's massive outreach efforts that's going on, that continues to go on, and I gotta tell you, even though I'm no longer in the nonprofit world, my doors at my housing development is open to all homeless veterans.
I'm Wendy McClinton. I'm a 10-year United States Army Honorable Discharge veteran. Came out of military with 3 children under the age of 5 after serving in Schofield Barracks, 25th Infantry Division Light Mechanized. Left out of my debriefing, got on a plane, got to New York City, came home, and was homeless. And I asked myself that question too. Wow, how did this happen? And that's what I really want to talk about today, and to share with something that all of us can take part in, not just in New York and in Maryland or wherever we're all from across the United States, because I think that we all face the problem, and we come back and we ask ourselves, how did this happen? How did someone that served 10 years honorably in the United States Army come home and now I'm homeless? Well, one of those things, but I'm hoping, but Thank God that was in 1994. Thank God now that we have the VA along with the Department of Defense. They have stepped up their game. They're now communicating together, trying to make that transition process a little bit more tighter, a little bit more easier, a little bit more able to maneuver, but more so than that, they're making individuals accountable to attending. It's no longer a 30-minute presentation and you leave. There's some check marks, there's some benchmarks, there's some things that you have to go through. So we came home and I went, and the only service that I could access was unemployment. Couldn't even access the VA at that time. The only thing I could do was remember that when I was in the military, they took care of all of our needs, me and my family. And at the time, when I transitioned with the children, I was going through a divorce at the same time. So to come back and they said, oh, you're gonna have housing, they'll go down to the Broadway, you'll get a Section 8 voucher and all these great things. That's what they said, but when I got home, that was not the reality. But now, and it's sad to say, in some cases, the reality may still be the same. So when we look at female veterans or any veteran that becomes homeless, we have to ask ourselves why and what is the reason. Some may be, for first reason is there's no transferable work skill. That's one reason why they might be homeless. Because if I was a sniper, or some infantry person, or having a job that I don't have that skill now, that I can have a job that's going to transfer into work and a wage that I can afford to maintain myself and my family, that can be a cause as well. A barrier with education. That can be a barrier with leaving, why people become homeless. And then even now I have this GI Bill and everything that I can access. Now I have to go back to school, but in that time, I'm still not having a wage that can sustain myself, so I can become homeless that way. Maybe there's a loss of a loved one, or maybe my spouse is demised and there's not enough income there. So there are a lot of different barriers, not to mention the psychological barriers that we may go through. How many times when I came home, the first thing my mother said, you are not the person that left. So there are certain types of things that we must do to reintegrate ourselves back into the community. Another reason that causes homelessness amongst veterans is that a lack of knowledge on the community's part. Because a lot of times in New York City, what we see, the picture of the face of the veteran is not always pictured or depicted in a great way. So in New York City, I know some of you may have heard about the veteran who drove his car up 42nd Street and caused the casualties of many lives. So unfortunate. But then when they interviewed his mom, he heard his mom said he told his mother, I hear voices. But no one paid attention to that. A lot of the times when you go through the military and these transitional assistance programs, we don't pay keen attention to some points that may come out that you hear that will then say, guess what? We have to address this barrier or address this issue now before the individual, male or female, leaves the military. And now we do a soft toss over to, or a soft pass to, a community-based organization or a veteran service organization or a faith-based organization that can assist in that transition instead of just leaving someone that you've trained to do whatever it is. And some people say, they find it funny because I'll just tell them this story. And I was in the shelter because after I came home and there was no place for me to go, I went back to my mom's house, but my mother became a foster parent. So there were other people, there were children that didn't have a place to live living in my room. So my children couldn't go and stay there for a long period of time. So we wound up at the EAU in the Bronx. And I looked around and I said, I was already, you talk about PTSD, drop a soldier in the EAU in the Bronx. That will set it off all by itself. And no one looks like me, no one talks like me, they don't walk like me, they don't move the same movement like we move. And at the time, get this now, if I'm a soldier, my 3 sons were little soldiers because I hadn't learned to parent yet. I was a soldier. So that's something that's going to come. So women veterans go through a lot when they're making that transition. So I went to the front desk and I said, do you have a shelter? Do you have some place for women veterans and their family to go? And the security guard looked at me and said, well, what makes you so different? Don't you have, no, and I'm not going to say it. They said to me, what makes you so different? You're no different than any woman here. You have your menstrual cycle, but they didn't say it that way. They said that you have your menstrual cycle just like everybody else in here. What makes you so different? And I looked at her, and I boldly said, well, one thing about me, I'm trained to kill you. In the next breath, before I could turn around, they had me on a bus to the G building at Kings County Hospital, me and my 3 children, and the G building was actually the psych ward. But it was a good thing, because there was an organization, and this is why I want to say to you and the organizations that are here, outreach and advocacy is so important, because if that person was not there and he was walking around with a flyer, nothing all extravagant, and it said, are you homeless? Are you in need of services? Do you need a place to stay? And it said Black Veterans for Social Justice. And that was in 1994. That organization, I went there. I said, I meet all these criteria. I got there. I started there as a secretary and got my first job there. I got my first apartment there. And now, you know, I'm the CEO of that organization 23 years later. But it was so important, and we use those tools and those practices today, and they still work. Having individuals go out and do outreach. I'm not talking about flyer distribution. I'm talking about outreach. When you reach out and you give someone an information, you impart something, and you bring them back to the services. We don't just service honorably discharged veterans. We service all veterans, because nobody speaks about the other minority veterans, the ones that don't have good paper, the ones that have honorable discharge or other than honorable discharges. We service them as well. And this is where our community-based organizations come in, so that no matter what veteran walks in the door, you're able to meet them where they're at. The second part of the advocacy, which is so very important, is that you have to get, or we have to get our veterans to now start to speak on their behalf. There is nothing more prevalent when you're going to your city, state, and federal officials to have that veteran or to speak, or the family members of veterans come forth and speak on their behalf. You have to get them to understand that if they're not sitting at the table, they're on the menu. And it's time out. It's not acceptable anymore for individuals to tell veterans or to tell us what they need. They are the best storytellers. They're the best ones, because some of these programs don't work because they didn't ask the veterans. And what can we do to help? Ask, communicate, talk, sit down. We cannot operate in our own silos anymore. We have to partner. We had a great opening piece with the American Legion and the VFWs and the other different veteran service organizations. We have to work together. SSVF, HVRP have to work together. It's not just, exactly. Collaborations and partnerships will end homelessness. Even though in New York City they're at functional 0, but the recidivism rate, they're coming back. Just as fast as they function 0, they now function 1, 2, 3. It's getting bigger. You know, so it's getting bigger, but but you have to catch it. And that's the problem. We can't function on just the numbers. We have to function and remember that those numbers are individuals that have needs and they have wants. And then we have to get their answer. What is your solution? And then we try to make their plan work. So if I can share anything with you, and that's what Black Veterans for Social Justice did for me, it's a model that we practice today, that when an individual comes into the organization or in anywhere, the first thing that asks is, how can we assist you in making your dream come true? Thank you.
Woo! Come on.
At the Washington, D.C. Veterans Affairs Medical Center, we have a commitment to caring for all veterans, including those who are homeless, at risk for homelessness, those who served peacetime, and those who served combat, including those who are wounded or not. We invite you to get social with us on social media at Facebook at Washington, D.C. VAMC, on Twitter at DCVAMC, or visit our website, www.washingtondc.va.gov.
That's all for this edition of Veterans in Transition. We ask that you like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. If you have a story to tell, reach out to us at vetsintransition.com. And remember, we all have a story to tell. Until next time.
My name is Paul Davis. I'm a retired Navy captain. I'm also managing director of CDP and Associates. One of the most important things that I think we need to do as a nation is to truly appreciate the young men and women that in some cases have given their all, their lives, for the safety, well-being of this nation. Without those individuals, the freedoms that we enjoy, you wouldn't enjoy. So I just want to say thank you to each and every one of them, and I just hope that there's young people that will take their place in the future.